Part 1. The archive floated in the empty space between galaxies, far from any star or world. It was old, so old that the species who built it had died out millions of years ago. But the archive remained, maintained by the archivists, beings of crystal and light who had taken up the duty of keeping records for all who came after. Inside the archive was the Cosmic Nightmare database. Every spacefaring species in the known universe had contributed to it. The database held their fears, their warnings, their hard lessons. When a new species joined galactic society, they were given access to the database so they could learn what to avoid. It was a gift of knowledge paid for in blood across countless worlds. Archivists had worked in the database for 3,000 cycles. In that time, had the fears of 200 species. There were entries about the void swarm, creatures that ate starships. There were warnings about the singing death, a sound wave that could shatter planets. There were records of plagues, weapons, and phenomena that understanding had thought there was nothing left that could surprise a being made of crystal and ancient knowledge. Then humanity arrived. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 40 cycles ago. In galactic terms, they were newborns. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were primitive. Their worlds were few. When first created their entry in the database, it was short and unremarkable. Omnivorous primates from a small blue world, moderate aggression, social creatures with strong tribal bonds, notable endurance for biological organisms, no special threat detected. Filed the entry and forgot about humanity. There were older and more interesting species to study. Everything changed because of the hegemony of. They were an old and powerful species. They had built an empire spanning 400 star systems. Their ships were fast and deadly. Their soldiers were feared. They sat on the Galactic Concord, the great council that governed relations between species. When they spoke, others listened. They did not think much of humans. To them, humanity was just another young species stumbling into space. They would learn their place, or they would be taught. The teaching began on a day like any other. A human civilian transport called that was carrying 300 colonists to a new world. These were ordinary people, families, workers, children. They had left Earth to build a new life among the stars. There was not a warship. It carried no weapons. Its crew sent out signals of peace to anyone who would listen. The ship strayed into space that they claimed as their own. It was an honest mistake. The borders in that region were poorly marked, and human maps were not yet complete. A patrol found the drifting through their territory. The patrol commander did not ask questions. He did not give warnings. He had standing orders to destroy any trespasser. The commander was a good soldier who followed his orders without thought. They died in a flash of light. 300 humans were gone in an instant. The patrol commander noted the kill in his log and continued his route. The hegemony sent a message to Earth. They expressed mild regret for the incident. They explained that the humans had been in restricted space. They offered compensation of 12,000 galactic credits per person killed. In culture, this was generous. It was more than they would pay for their own workers. The message reached Earth. Governments read it. Families of the dead received it. The entire planet learned what had happened to the. And then something strange occurred. Humanity went quiet. Notice this because noticed everything. Where other young species would have raged and threatened, humanity said nothing. Where others would have sent angry messages or launched foolish attacks, humanity remained calm. Their diplomats attended meetings. Their traders signed agreements. Their representatives smiled at officials and spoke of understanding and peace. The hegemony was pleased. They believed they had shown humanity the natural order of things. The strong ruled. The weak accepted. This was how the galaxy worked. 3 cycles passed. Humanity built more ships. They established more colonies. They made friends among other species. They asked questions about the hegemony, always politely, always with interest. They learned about culture, economy, military. They took notes. They remembered. Then came the day of the Galactic Concord meeting. The Great Council gathered to discuss trade routes and border disputes. It was routine business. Representatives sat in their places of honor, bored by the proceedings. Human representatives sat in the back, where new species belonged. A human woman stood and asked to speak. Her name was. She was not important by galactic standards. She held no great title. She was simply a diplomat who had requested a moment of the council's time. The council granted her request. It seemed harmless. Walked to the center of the chamber. She was small compared to most species present. Her voice was soft. She did not look threatening in any way. She said she wished to read some names. For 4 hours recited the names of everyone who had died on the. She spoke each name clearly. She told the council each person's age. She described their dreams. Maria Santos, age 32, who wanted to grow flowers on a new world. James, age 7, who had never seen an alien and was excited to make friends. Age 61, who had worked her whole life to afford passage for her. 300 names, 300 stories, 300 futures that would never happen. The delegates grew uncomfortable. They shifted in their seats. They whispered to each other. This was not how diplomacy worked. This was not how defeated species behaved. When finished, she looked at the delegation. Her eyes were dry, her voice was steady. She said 5 words that would later add to the database. Humanity does not forget. Then she returned to her seat. The meeting continued, but something had changed. Other species looked at the humans differently. The delegates left early, uncomfortable in a way they could not explain. Began watching humanity more closely. Months passed. Strange things started happening to the hegemony. A military outpost lost power for 3 days. Equipment failed. Food spoiled. By the time repairs were made, the soldiers stationed there were hungry and angry. A shipyard suffered a computer error. Navigation data was corrupted. Ships were sent to wrong locations. Supplies did not arrive where they were needed. A communication relay went dark. Important messages were lost. Orders were delayed. Coordination became difficult. Each incident was small. Each incident could be explained as bad luck or poor maintenance. But the incidents kept happening, one after another, in different places across the hegemony. An admiral complained to his superiors. He said it felt like someone was watching them. It felt like invisible hands were slowly closing around their throats. He could not prove anything. He just knew something was wrong. His superiors told him he was being paranoid. Bad luck happened. Equipment failed. These were normal problems. The admiral was not convinced. He ordered an investigation. His investigators found nothing. Meanwhile, human traders continued to visit ports. They smiled. They made deals. They asked innocent questions. They were friendly and polite and helpful. No one connected the traders to the problems. Why would they? Humans were weak. Humans were primitive. Humans were harmless. Updated the database entry for humanity. The archivist added a new note. Humans were patient. They did not rush. They planned. They waited. They smiled while they worked. Had seen many predators in the database. Some were fast and violent. Some used venom or traps or overwhelming numbers. But had never seen a predator quite like humanity. They did not attack their prey. They surrounded it. They studied it. They learned its weaknesses. And then when they were ready, they began to squeeze. Slowly, patiently, without ever showing their teeth. The hegemony did not understand what was happening. They could not see the danger because it came with a smile and friendly words. But could see it. The archivist made another note in the database. This note was a warning. Part 2. 6 cycles had passed since the destruction of the hegemony of had grown used to small problems, equipment failures, supply delays, communication errors. These annoyances had become part of daily life for their military forces. Then the problems got bigger. It started with the shipyards. The hegemony maintained 12 major shipyards across their empire. These facilities built warships, repaired vessels, and kept the fleet strong. Each shipyard held the plans for every ship the hegemony had ever made. One morning, technicians arrived at work and found their computers corrupted. The data was not deleted, it was changed. Small errors had been introduced into the ship designs. A support beam was weakened here. A power coupling was crossed there. The changes were subtle. Ships built from these plans would function normally for months before failing. The corruption spread to all 12 shipyards before anyone understood what was happening. Investigators traced the attack to its source. They found a human girl on a colony world far from space. She was 17 years old. Her name was. She lived alone in a small apartment and worked part-time at a repair shop. When agents questioned her, she did not deny anything. She admitted to the attack freely. She showed them how she had done it, step by step, with pride in her work. They asked her why. She shrugged and said she had been planning to apply to the Naval Academy. She had admired their ships. She had wanted to learn from the best engineers in the galaxy. Then they killed her grandmother. Her grandmother had been a passenger on the. Her name was Sun. She was 63 years old. She had been traveling to help start a new life on a colony world. Sun had worked in a factory for 40 years to save enough money for the journey. Had received 12,000 credits in compensation. She donated the money to a fund that helped other families affected by the attack. Then she spent 2 years learning everything she could about computer systems. The agents asked if she had help. Smiled and said nothing. The hegemony decided to make an example. They could not allow a human child to humiliate their empire without consequences. A strike force was sent to destroy a human mining station in a nearby system. The attack was quick and brutal. 40 workers died. The station was left as burning wreckage. The hegemony announced that this was justice. They had answered human aggression with appropriate force. They expected humanity to understand the message. Humanity understood the message. 3 days after the attack, the families of the 40 workers received messages. The messages came from an anonymous source. No one could trace where they originated. Each message contained personnel files, names, ranks, home addresses, daily schedules, security rotations, information about families and friends. The files described every officer involved in ordering and executing the attack. The messages ended with 3 words: "We remember." No threats were made. No demands were given, just information and a reminder. The officers named in the files began to feel uncomfortable. They hired extra security. They changed their routines. They looked over their shoulders when walking down streets. Nothing happened to them. Weeks passed. Months passed. The officers relaxed. They told themselves that humans were weak and could do nothing with the information. Then one officer's business failed. His partner had received anonymous evidence of financial crimes. Another officer's marriage collapsed when his spouse received detailed records of his affairs. A third officer was arrested after police discovered weapons in his home that he had never seen before. Nothing violent happened. Nothing dramatic. Just small disasters, one after another, spreading through the lives of everyone connected to the mining station attack. Added a new section to the database entry on humanity. The archivist called it multi-generational vengeance. Humans did not view revenge as a single action. They viewed it as a relationship. They would maintain that relationship for years, decades, or even centuries. A wrong done to a human's ancestor could be answered by their. Humans passed down their grudges like treasured possessions. They kept records, they made lists, they remembered. And they were patient. The hegemony's problems continued to grow. Trade became difficult. Human merchants had spent years accepting currency at favorable rates. They had stockpiled vast amounts of it in banks across the galaxy. Without warning, they sold all of it. The currency crashed overnight. Its value fell by 70%. Worlds that depended on imported food could no longer afford to buy it. Factories that needed off-world materials shut down. The hegemony's economy, which had been strong and stable, began to collapse. Riots broke out on colony worlds. Citizens demanded answers. The government had none to give. They could not explain how everything had gone wrong so quickly. Some officials suspected human involvement. They pointed to the timing. They noted how human merchants had positioned themselves perfectly to profit from the crash, but they could not prove anything. The trades were all legal. The merchants had simply made smart decisions at the right time. Humans were lucky, the officials told themselves, just lucky. But luck does not last for years. Luck does not target one species while leaving others untouched. Luck does not smile at you while destroying everything you built. The hegemony finally admitted what they had known for some time. They were at war with humanity. They simply did not know when the war had started or where the battlefield was. A delegation was sent to Earth to negotiate peace. The humans welcomed them warmly. They provided comfortable quarters. They served excellent food. They listened politely to the terms. The hegemony offered to pay additional compensation for They offered to mark their borders more clearly. They offered trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. They offered everything they could think of to end the conflict. Now Secretary of External Relations for Earth heard their offers. She nodded thoughtfully at each point. She took notes. She asked clarifying questions. Then she presented humanity's counteroffer. The hegemony would surrender their entire fleet. Every warship, every transport, every vessel capable of space travel would be handed over to human control. The hegemony would give up their colonial holdings. Every world outside their home system would be released from rule. The hegemony would resign their seats on the Galactic Concord. They would have no voice in galactic affairs. In exchange for all this, Earth would allow the species to continue existing. The ambassador stared at. He could not believe what he was hearing. He told her that no species would accept such humiliation. He said his people would fight to the last soldier before surrendering everything. Nodded sympathetically. She said she understood his position. Then she said two words that added to the database. "We'll wait." The delegation returned to the hegemony with nothing. Their leaders raged at the insult. They ordered their military to prepare for total war. But their military was broken. Ships failed because of corrupted designs. Officers were distracted by personal disasters. Supply lines had collapsed with the economy. Soldiers were hungry and unpaid and angry at leaders who could not protect them. The hegemony began to fracture. Regional governors declared independence. Military commanders fought each other for resources. Factions formed around different leaders, each promising to save their people from the human threat. Watched and recorded and understood. The humans had not attacked the hegemony with weapons. They had attacked with patience. They had found every weakness, every crack, every point of failure in society. Then they had applied pressure, slowly and carefully, until everything fell apart. The hegemony was destroying itself. The humans simply watched it happen. And smiled. Part 3. Floated in the crystalline halls of the archive, reviewing data from across the galaxy. The fall of the hegemony had become the most discussed event in living memory. Every species watched. Every species learned. The Civil War had begun 3 cycles ago. It showed no signs of ending. The hegemony had splintered into 14 factions. Each faction controlled different worlds, different resources, different portions of the old military. They fought each other with desperate fury while the rest of the galaxy stood back. had studied the conflict carefully. The archivist noticed patterns that others missed. Human intelligence services had identified the most ambitious faction leaders before the war began. They knew which generals hungered for power. They knew which governors resented the central government. They knew which admirals had private feuds with their colleagues. Humanity had provided each faction with just enough weapons to believe they could win, not enough to actually win, just enough to keep fighting. They had fed information to all sides. They revealed secrets that factions had kept from each other. Old grudges became open wounds. Hidden resentments exploded into violence. The humans had calculated everything. They had determined the exact distribution of resources needed to maximize the duration of the conflict while minimizing outside interference. They had turned the hegemony into a machine that consumed itself. Some understood what had happened. They tried to warn others. They begged their leaders to stop fighting each other and unite against the real enemy. No one listened. The hatred between factions had grown too deep. Trust had been destroyed. Everyone suspected everyone else of working with the humans. The warnings were dismissed as propaganda. The messengers were executed as traitors. Added this observation to the database. Humans did not just defeat their enemies. They made their enemies defeat themselves. They found this approach more efficient and more satisfying. Gave occasional interviews to galactic media. She expressed concern about the suffering of ordinary citizens. She offered humanitarian aid. She spoke about the importance of peace and stability. She never mentioned vengeance. She never celebrated the destruction. She simply watched with sad eyes and spoke of hope for a better future. Found this remarkable. The woman who had read 300 names before the galactic conquered showed no triumph. She displayed no satisfaction. She seemed genuinely troubled by what was happening. Perhaps she was. Humans were complex. They could want something and regret it at the same time. They could pursue vengeance for years while hoping they would never catch it. Or perhaps it was performance. Humans were excellent at performance. Could not tell. This uncertainty was itself worth noting. The database entry on humanity grew longer each day. Added sections on human psychology, human social structures, human decision-making processes. The entry was becoming one of the largest in the entire database. Other species requested copies. They wanted to understand this new power in the galaxy. They wanted to know how to deal with humans. They wanted to avoid becoming the next hegemony. Provided the information freely. That was the purpose of the archive. Knowledge was meant to be shared. The entry contained a section on recommendations. Had written it carefully, choosing each word with precision. Prevention is the only viable strategy against human vengeance. Do not harm humans. Do not threaten humans. Do not allow humans to believe you have harmed or threatened them. If human vengeance has already been triggered, immediate surrender offers the highest probability of survival. Resistance increases human satisfaction and extends the conflict. Partial measures are worse than useless. They simply give humans more time to work. Accept whatever terms humanity offers. The terms will be harsh. They will feel unfair. They will seem designed to humiliate. Accept them anyway. The alternative is worse. Remember that humans do not forget. Any betrayal, any broken promise, any hidden act of revenge will be discovered eventually. Humans are patient. They can wait generations for the right moment to respond. The safest approach is to never give humans reason for vengeance in the first place. Treat them fairly. Honor agreements. Respect their people. If accidents occur, offer genuine apologies and meaningful compensation. Show that you understand the value of what was lost. This may not prevent vengeance entirely, but it may reduce its severity. Concluded the recommendations with a final note. This species is not evil. They do not enjoy destruction. They do not seek domination. They simply cannot tolerate being wronged. Their sense of justice is absolute and eternal. The entry was nearly complete when a message arrived at the archive. A human delegation wished to visit. They wanted to contribute their own fears to the database. Was surprised. Most species sent their submissions electronically. A personal visit was rare and expensive. It suggested that humanity considered this contribution important. The delegation arrived several cycles later. There were 3 humans. 2 were diplomats in formal clothing. The third was. Met them in the great hall of the archive. The crystalline walls reflected their images into infinity. The air was cool and still. Light from distant stars filtered through windows of perfect glass. Looked around with appreciation. She commented on the beauty of the space. She asked how long the archive had existed. She seemed genuinely interested in the answers. Then she presented humanity's contribution to the database. It was a single entry, just one fear to add to the millions already recorded. Read it and felt something that the archivist could only call unease. The entry was simple. We are afraid of becoming what we hate. Explained. Humans had studied the database. They had read about species that destroyed others out of fear or anger or wounded pride. They had seen how empires rose through violence and fell through the violence they inspired in return. Humanity saw themselves in those stories. They recognized the patterns. They knew they were capable of the same destruction. What they did to the hegemony had been necessary. They had killed 300 innocent people and offered insults instead of apologies. They had attacked again when given the chance to make peace. They had proven that they would never stop unless stopped. But necessity did not make the hegemony's fate good. It did not make it right. It simply made it unavoidable. Humans feared that they would start to enjoy such things. They feared that vengeance would become a habit rather than a last resort. They feared that someday they would destroy a species that did not deserve destruction and tell themselves it was justified. They feared becoming monsters while believing themselves heroes. Considered this for a long time. Then the archivist made a decision. The contribution would not be added to the general database. It was too instructive. Other species might use it as a weapon, might try to manipulate humanity by playing on this fear. That would be dangerous for everyone. Instead, created a private file. It was accessible only to chief archivists, those who had earned the deepest trust of the archive. The file contained humanity's fear and its analysis of what it meant. This species is aware of their own capacity for destruction. They do not celebrate it. They do not deny it. They face it honestly and worry about what it might make them. This is rare. Most species either cannot see their own darkness or refuse to acknowledge it. Humans see it clearly and are afraid. This fear may be their salvation, or it may be their greatest weakness. Only time will tell which. Filed the document and returned to the great hall. The human delegation was preparing to leave. Paused at the doorway. She looked back with eyes that had seen too much. She was older now than when she had read those 300 names. The years showed in her face. She said she hoped the archive would stand forever. She said the galaxy needed places of knowledge and memory. She said that forgetting was the beginning of repeating. Then she smiled and added one final thought. Humanity would always remember the archive's kindness in this visit. They would always appreciate the respect shown to their contribution. They considered the archivists friends. It was a simple statement, a polite farewell, but understood the deeper meaning. Humanity had just extended protection to the archive. Any species that threatened this place would face human attention. It was a gift and a warning wrapped in courtesy. Accepted it with equal courtesy and watched the delegation depart. The archive floated in the empty space between galaxies, ancient and patient. Inside its walls, the cosmic nightmare database grew larger each cycle. New fears were added. Old fears were updated. The wisdom of countless species was preserved for those who would come after. The entry on humanity remained prominent in the collection. New species were required to read it before entering galactic society. It served as both education and warning. Some species learned from it. They treated humans fairly and honestly. They built relationships based on respect. They prospered. Other species ignored the warnings. They thought themselves clever enough to manipulate humans. They believed their own strength would protect them. They learned otherwise. Recorded everything. The successes and the failures, the friendships and the destructions. The archive remembered so that others could learn. And somewhere in the database, in a file that only the could access, a single fear waited to remind future readers of an important truth. The most dangerous predators are those who know what they are. The most terrifying enemies are those who hate their own victory. Humanity was both. And they were still watching, still learning, still remembering. The galaxy would do well to remember that.